Yeah.
Oh, duh. All right, cool. Thank you all for joining. Small crew, but we like quality more than quantity, so we're good on that front. So I'm Eric Britt-Webb, and during the daytime, I do business development for a cybersecurity software company. But on my evenings and weekends, I'm incubating kind of a passion project, could become a startup business called Great Album. And in this presentation, you'll get a little bit of what is Great Album, and then we'll talk about kind of the journey that we've been through. With me today on the call, we have Seema, who is project manager and also coming up to speed as product owner for the application. And it looks like we have a couple of our team colleagues who are up late, dialed in from Bangalore. Sahana and Thomas are here with us as well. Thank you. Great. This is interactive, so you're welcome to post questions in chat or even just pipe up and ask when you have questions. And Seema and Yi will help me to monitor chat as we go. All right, so Great Album, what is it? If you're like me, you got a lot of media. I have 150,000 pictures in my Google Photos account. And then I have a wife and 3 kids who also have photos in Google Photos and iCloud and places like that. Some people also have those photos and videos spread across mobile phones and laptop computers and things like that. And do you ever find it maddening that you're trying to go back and look for photos of a special event from 5 or 10 years ago, and it's just lost in an ocean of photos? And there's not really any easy way to kind of like browse through photos, you know, looking for ones from birthdays or kids' plays at schools or things like that. So imagine if there was a way to make that better. And imagine if for a moment your media still lived in these places where you felt it was really safe and secure, whether it's Google or Apple or Instagram or whatever, but you could kind of catalog all that media into one kind of Uber app that sat on top of those. And imagine if that app ingested the metadata of all of those different photos and videos and automatically created events that represented collections of that media, tagging both the media as well as like the individuals who were there and the places where those events took place, based on fairly basic pattern matching of dates and locations and faces. For instance, anytime you have more than 10 pictures on a given day in a given location, we're going to call that an event. And maybe it's not and you'll delete it, but in a lot of cases, it probably is. And along with that, you could then go through and like give titles to the events and correct kind of where they took place and who was there. And then, you know, if you're like me, you have this experience where you're moving so fast that it's one thing just to take the pictures, but like sometimes really cool things actually happen at that events. And wouldn't it be cool if you could actually like share a little note to yourself, or, you know, several of you could share your experience, whether it was going on a family vacation together or it was like celebrating my mother here on the top right. She turns 80 on Monday. And if we have time at the end, I'll show you a little project I've been working on. But I spent the last month collecting stories from like 30 or 40 of her friends and family to celebrate her at this really special kind of occasion in her life. And imagine if you could do that much more easily when people hit major milestones. And how many of you here ever watch TV series or movies on Netflix or HBO or Disney or even CBS? Anybody? Anybody do any video watching over the last year when you couldn't go out to party and you couldn't go to a restaurant and things like that? Well, when's the last time that you pop some popcorn and watch a little series of home movies, right? Do you have videos that you've taken over the years of your kids or your parents or this or that? And you know you got them, and you tell yourself, gosh, it'd be fun someday to go back and like watch some video highlights, or I got all this extra time with my kids. Why don't we watch a few videos of some special events, where we actually took time to record those events take place? It's like next to impossible to do because that video is just lost in this ocean and you don't know how to pull it up, you don't know how to organize it, you don't know how to like connect several of them together. Well, imagine if you could sit there and say, okay, well, let's just watch, video highlights from last year, and I'll just pick 10 random videos. Or maybe I want to watch like a few videos I pull out of kids' soccer tournaments and plays and things like that. Or maybe I want to watch a few highlights with my 12-year-old Beckett, just because like he's bored out of his mind. Wouldn't it be cool if you could do that sort of thing and kind of have Netflix with your own personal home media? And then wouldn't it be even more cool if you could share those highlights and those events with people that you really care about in a way that was easy? Today, if you create photos and videos and put them in an album, a Google Photos album or an iCloud album, you have to share that album with specific people that you identify by name and email. And then when you create the next album, you guys share that too with all the same people. And oh, you forgot Aunt Jane. So now you got to go back and update the last 3 albums to add her because you forgot to, share those albums with her. Well, wouldn't it be cool if you could create a group, or in our vocabulary, we call it an album, that has a defined set of members, and then every event is kind of like a photo album with media attached and tags individuals and places. And every time you add a new event with a collection of media into that group or album, all of the members get notified. Hey, Glenn's shared, a new album of his kid playing soccer, and Catherine shared a fun video and set of pictures from that trip that she finally got to take. So, and then imagine if you don't have just one group or community that you're part of, but you have bunches, right? When my kid plays in a game, I take the pictures and I share that event with his soccer team. But I also share it with the extended family who also try to keep up with my kid, or I force them to keep up, right? Or if you have a child or somebody graduating from college, right? You take pictures not just from the college event, but pictures from her life over her first 18 years leading up to that time, and kind of celebrate the individual at this major milestone. So the idea is that this enables that kind of sharing and celebration to happen in all of these different contexts. So this gives you kind of the idea or the vision of what it is we're trying to create. Now let's talk about how much we screwed it up along the way and what we've been slowly learning as we have been working as a remote distributed team across US, Canada, and India. So a little about our journey. Okay, so I'm sitting here as a founder in the US. Not originally, but now Seema is working with me as project manager based up in Toronto. And then I had the development team in India. How do I kind of define requirements and structure the work of developing and delivering those requirements? So I'm kind of passing that information to my team over here. And then along the bottom, how do they ask clarifying questions and figure out, this mess that I have in my head? And how do they communicate problems that come up and progress? And then kind of in the middle, how do we go back and forth rapidly discussing ideas that can evolve and improve what it is we're trying to accomplish? You have, communication and ideas flowing, and you're trying to find a way to make that work seamlessly across 10,000 miles of distance between us and 10 time zones. So our first attempt at this, we used a really wonderful product SaaS tool called Backlog. It's really great for online project management for developers. That's what it's built for. And took out a subscription for that, used it for task management. I actually defined a lot of the requirements right in the tasks as I was telling them, okay, build this form and it's got to do these things, and then build this view and it's got to do these kinds of things. And we would have weekly team calls to review progress on how they were doing. And then we were using WhatsApp, which is huge for groups working internationally, huge in India, to go back and forth on communication. And that was really kind of the basics that we were following. Okay, that was a nice idea. Didn't work all that well. You should not manage requirements inside tasks. Tasks are for tracking getting work done, not really for defining the work. And tasks as themselves don't necessarily do a good job at communicating the value to the customer that we're trying to create. And while WhatsApp is great for real-time communication, it's really not structured very well. And we needed a much more structured way of communicating across a whole range of different topics. So we, couple months in, and oh, by the way, the weekly reviews was terrible. I mean, they would wait way too long to really understand meaty, difficult problems that I was not effectively communicating to them. So reboot, second attempt, and we tried to do better. So first off, for knowledge, for requirements gathering and definition, we moved to Confluence, which is one of the oldest and probably most mature kind of wiki tools that we could use anywhere across the world, right, for creating and managing content, predominantly requirements, but also things like daily sprint updates and developing questions that we need to ask communities to get help on topics. And then we use Jira, another Atlassian product that is one of the most well-established for project management. But we used it differently than we use Backlog. So it wasn't just about switching the tool, it was changing the way we used it. And we used the cloud versions of both of those that were really tightly integrated so that you could easily connect requirements pages to tasks that were assigned to implement those requirements. And we switched to Slack, which I think we all by now are familiar with on some level. We're even using it here for Nerd Summit. And even with the free subscription, you can have the last 10,000 posts kept in your history, and you can integrate all sorts of different apps, and you can have many, many different channels and many users. And so we've used that really very effectively over the last close to a year now. More importantly than the tools, we got smarter on the methodology. Any of you here used Agile methodology in any of your projects? You're all turned video off, so it's kind of hard to raise your hand, but there is a little hand raise feature in Zoom where you can do a reaction and raise your hand. Agile methodology, besides sounding kind of more cool than waterfall, is really all about creating much more dynamic process between the people who have these crazy ideas of what they want to implement and the people who have to make sense of that and actually do the work. So I sit over here thinking up all these cool ideas of things that I want the product to do, and I create a bunch of snippets of functionality that get defined and build up what's called a product backlog. It's all the stuff I want this cool, great album app to do. Then I work with Seema and try to group all those pieces of functionality into collections of work that we're going to do every couple of weeks or so. And each of those groups of work is called a sprint. and you run a sprint. Could be 1 week, could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'd say 2 weeks is kind of the median that you'll find out there. And you plan these sprints so that, sitting today, I kind of know for the next 1 or 2 or 3 sprints, roughly the work that we want to get done. You do the planning for that, then you get into the sprint and you work like a dog with the team to get through all the tasks that get defined. Um, and as part of that, you have a daily scrum call. That sounds like a highly technical term, but it basically means spend anywhere from like 10 to 30 minutes each morning going over the work that was completed yesterday and any issues that came up, the work that you're planning to complete today, and any particular issues or concerns you have about getting that work done, as well as any festering problems we have about just completing the work as a whole in this sprint, or some issue we have about what we're thinking we're going to do in the next sprint. And then usually, if your product manager and your business owner are not part of those daily Scrum meetings, then near the end, as you're getting ready to essentially deliver the value out of that sprint, you do a review with the business owner or the product manager to make sure that the functionality being implemented is actually on the mark. And once that sprint gets completed and the work gets approved, those completed features move into the completed product. And as a team, ideally, you do a short retrospective on that sprint. What worked well, what didn't work well, what things would we like to do differently in the next sprint? It's very, very easy to not do those retrospectives. We as a team at Great Album totally suck at doing them. We've probably had a dozen sprints and we've done like 3 retrospectives. But they're really a good practice if you want to continue to evolve the way you're working together as a team. So this really gives you the flow and the feel for how we've been working to emulate some of the best practices out there at managing an agile team. And if you want to get smarter on this, you can just go to Atlassian.com/agile. That is the Agile Coach section of their website. And there is a ton of really, really great information that breaks down all of these different concepts in great detail with videos and examples and all of that. That alone would be enough to really kind of guide you on this process. Beyond that, there's lots of good books and videos and other resources as well. Just to break down these concepts a little bit more. So sprint, you heard me describe as this time box period in which the team works to complete a defined amount of work. Within the sprint, you have a bunch of tasks that you want to get done. And part of what's really cool about the agile methodology is you try to not just do tasks. You try to group those tasks into meaningful chunks of value that you're delivering to your stakeholders. And those chunks of work within the sprint are called epics. And they themselves can be defined as some value that you're trying to deliver. And then within those epics, you write not just tasks, but what are called stories or user stories. And in the ideal world, they're actually written from the end user's point of view about that particular enhancement to the application that is going to make the user experience just a little bit better. We often fall into the trap of just writing it as kind of a task, but we try to stick with stories. And in agile methodologies like Jira, only stories can have points associated with them, whereas tasks and bugs can also have time estimates as well. And a lot of teams typically gravitate towards using time estimates. Okay, Seema, how long is it going to take you to do this task? Sahana, how long is it going to take you to do that? You got 80 hours over the next 2 weeks, so I want to fill you up, I want to fill up that 80 hours with work. Well, that's a nice idea, but the problem is we as human beings are horrific at estimating the amount of time it takes to get something done. We are always overly optimistic that we're going to get done faster than we actually do. How many of you here start your day with a to-do list, and at the end of the day, if you've accomplished half of the tasks on that list, you succeeded that day, right? You never get them all done. And if you're like me, half the time you don't even get past the third of the tasks that you'd plan to do for that day. So estimating time is terrible. A better approach is to use story points. And the reason is because it forces you to look at the different tasks or stories and try to kind of organize them in relative complexity. And general best practices uses something along the lines of what's called a Fibonacci sequence of point values. Fibonacci came up with this really amazing kind of a model where it's very often used in design, but it's also used in estimation. And you start with 1 as the smallest unit, or it could be 1/2. Some use that. And then the next unit of estimation is 2, twice as hard. And then the next is 1 plus 2 equals 3. Again, so that ends up being 50% more of the number 2. And then the next is 2 plus 3 equals 5, and then 3 plus 5 equals 8, and then 5 plus 8 equals 13. And then technically, the next number would be 21, but some schools of thought, and one popular kind of software development company out there called Mountain Goat has done some great writing on this. So they have the Mountain Goat story point approach, which says, well, once you get to about 20, I mean, 21 sounds like really precise, and clients get hung up. Wow, why did you come up with 21? Like, that's really cool. But why that? And so they say, well, just round it off to 20. And from there, you go to like 40 and then 100, just to kind of keep things simple. But in best practice, you really shouldn't have any stories or tasks above the 20 point number, because 20 points is about 2 days worth of work. And if you're in a sprint that's going for 2 weeks and you've got one task that is over 2 days, it's probably too big of a task, and you need to break that into 2 or 3 smaller tasks. And then when you're thinking to yourself, like, what point value should I give? Like, I have this thing, and I think it's really more like 6 or 7 points. It's more than 5, but it's less than 8. Should I give it 6 or 7? Even though technically I'm supposed to give it 5. And there's a really great analogy that says, well, think of your tasks in terms of water buckets. If you need to move 6 gallons of water from here to there, do you move it in the 5-gallon bucket, or do you move it in the 8-gallon bucket? You could use the 5-gallon, but you got to make 2 trips if you're going to do that. So it's better to use the 8-gallon bucket to get that water from here to there. So that means you got to give it 8 points. You can't give it 6 or 7. And it's another way of really forcing you to kind of separate tasks based on kind of relative level of complexity. Okay. This is an example of a recent sprint we did. As I said, this is not a great example. Do not do what I say and not what I do, sort of thing. But in a recent sprint, we were saying, okay, so in this sprint, we want to stabilize the Great Album site. We need to finish with a rebuild we were doing, and then there's a bunch of stories that were left from the last sprint that we still need to finish and push to the live site. And then there's some kind of UI and design enhancements that we want to do. We want to redo the great home, the home landing page, and we want to make some improvements to these views. And then over kind of around media, there's a few things that we want to do. We want to, add the button to import Google Photos, which actually is adding this whole custom module around Google Photos. And there's a couple other things we want to do with media. And we want to make some enhancements to the way we handle comments kind of in views. And so we put some things together there, and then we want to do some things that improve the notifications. So these were kind of the epics, and at a high level, they weren't the exact stories. The stories were a little bit more detailed and written out, but it kind of gives you a feel. This was like the top-down approach of describing what we were going to do in this sprint. And then we met that with the bottoms-up approach of the detailed tasks in Jira. As we've been planning sprints, we've started using the roadmap functionality within Jira, which actually for the Jira Cloud was just released in the last 6 months or so. It's been there in the kind of installed version of the software, but it's new to the cloud version. And there you can really very quickly just drop in new lines to define epics. That's what you see here. And then within the epics, to define the stories that exist in there. And we've actually got some of that stuff right here. So as you're working on these, you can both define them, and then you can also play around with like how long are these going to take. And they line up for a reason, right? Because these epics all are part of a given sprint. But as you're going, you can kind of just scroll through looking at your roadmap of stuff that's in there, and what's done and what's still in progress. And you'll notice like we're getting ready to start our beta 5, but we haven't fully baked it yet. And so I know, for instance, that there's going to be a whole epic here. And we're kind of using this approach where even within epics, the epics are specific to sprints. So we actually give a short name at the front to tell us which sprint this epic is part of. And we know there's going to be a whole bunch of work around forms and fields. So on the fly, I can just create a brand new epic. And then within that, on the fly, I can create stories of what needs to be done. And that's a nice, easy way to just get them in there as placeholders. And then you actually go back and you fill in all the detailed assignment and story points and dependencies and things like that. Okay. And then from a workflow perspective, we've taken the basic Jira workflow and we've extended it a little bit. So basically every task goes through this kind of seven-step process, right? It sits in to do when it hasn't been touched. Then it moves to in progress when Sahana is working on it in the development environment. And once she's finished that, she puts it into the common shared dev where it gets kind of validated that it's working with the rest of the dev environment, and then pushes that to the test environment and sets it to review. And I, on a regular basis, go in and actually check the dev review and resolve queue, which is all the stuff that I need to check and sign off on and approve that it's either done or needs to be fixed again. And if I like what I see and it's done, then I move it on to step 4 and say, okay, this is ready to be deployed in the live site. If I think there's some problem there, then I set it back to in progress with the comment that says, hey, Sahana, or hey, Thomas, this particular task needs a little extra work. And so you'll see where, Thomas and I've gone back and forth some, moving it from one status to the next. And we're having a collaborative discussion about the issue at the same time that we're moving it back and forth at different stages. Once it moves to deploy, Negi, who is acting as a developer, but also as the release manager, he knows to watch the dev issues to deploy queue. And every time there's stuff in deploy, then he goes to work getting those things deployed into production and clearing them out of that queue. He then sets them from deploy to resolved. I go in and I look at it in the live site, and if it looks exactly the way it did in test, and I'm happy with it, I mark it as done. If I don't like it for some reason, then I'll set it back to in progress again, and Thomas or Sahana will go make whatever fix needs to be made. Now, because that fix is actually in the live environment, once they've done that, they set it back to resolve again, which is where you see it going from 6 back to 5. And then I check it again in resolved. And if it's done, then I mark it as done. And so that kind of gives you the sense of how all of those stories make their way through each of these sprints. Now, you remember earlier I talked about don't manage requirements inside of your tasks and stories. Manage them separately in some kind of a knowledge base or knowledge management system. This gives you a view at the way that we've structured our Confluence environment. And I'm actually going to pull over a tab here and just quickly kind of show this to you. So our Confluence workspace has a bunch of high-level pages, and I can go down inside, a bunch of high-level pages. Down here near the bottom are 3 sets of pages called Great Home Structure, Great Album Structure, and Great Support Structure. Those actually represent the 3 distinct websites that work together. Great Home is just the brochure landing site that has a blog on it and the ability to sign up to be on the beta waitlist, that sort of thing. Great Album is the actual app itself, and then Great Support is a support website that we're building, because it's not enough that we're building an app. We thought we'd build a whole new support model for the app, and so we're building a support site to go along with it. And if you drill down inside of the Great Album site, you see a whole bunch of pages under that. We've got sitemap, we have global navigation, we have a map linking forms to support things. We have the taxonomies that we've defined. We've got the underlying data model. We have different email notifications. We have components around views and blocks that we're building. But probably most important is the screens and the functionality of the app. And so you drill down inside of that, and now you see the global nav menus that are there. And if you go in and look at like media screens and functionality, you'll see the different screens, you'll see the buttons that are related to that. You'll see some requirements around the media entity browser. This is always a work in progress and not as organized as it should be, but we continue to work on this as a way of defining what it is we've built. And when we want to make changes, don't just like describe the changes in a task, describe those changes in a structured knowledge management area. And if we ever go to rebuild this site, we'll update that to codify this. So that gives you kind of the idea for the way that we use the wiki space to manage the requirements. We track the progress, and I started to show you some of that. Not only do we have like the issues to resolve and the issues to deploy, we typically on our daily Scrum calls, we'll check here and look at like all of the open issues in a given sprint. And oftentimes there's a lot more. We're at the end of a sprint. But if I, for instance, added in all the ones that are done, you'd see a bunch more here. And sometimes we'll sort by who's assigned, and we'll kind of go through stuff by who's assigned. Other times we'll look at it by components, and we bucket the all of the features into different components on the site. Sometimes we'll look at it by the epics, because we've grouped tasks or stories into epics. Some of you may have worked with Kanbans and really like Kanban boards as a way of looking at assignments. So you can very easily do that. And here, for instance, you can see all the work going on in the active sprints. Typically, it's only one sprint that's active, but we've actually had overlap sometimes where we're still finishing up one sprint, but we get the next sprint started. And so I have the Kanban board broken, organized first by epic so that you see kind of all the work, and then by progress within each of those epics. And you'll see here that most of the stories are in the done column. And this one we actually need to update, I think. No, maybe not. Yeah, no,
Eric,
it actually, we're missing the deploy column here. So we might have to update this, but anyway, so we use the Kanban board fair amount. We'll use the backlog to look at all of those tasks or stories that we've created over time, which ones are in sprints, which ones are still in the backlog and haven't been assigned yet. And then we spend quite a bit of time in reports, and we look at the current sprint burn down chart to see like how are we doing that progress against completing all the work. And you'll see that we sometimes struggle quite a bit. Like we were supposed to be done with a sprint, at the beginning of the month, and we had a series of kind of setbacks that we worked with that, took a lot longer. You can, once you've gone through a few sprints, you can start to look at your velocity as a team. Like, how are we doing at defining the work and then delivering on the work that was defined? And if these sprints are contributing towards a next major version of the product, we had a version 0.8, and now we're working on 0.9. If you look at 0.9, the gray is all the work that's been defined, and the darker kind of bluish gray is the work that's been done. And at the pace that we're going right now, we'll complete the work for this version 0.9 sometime in mid-May. And so there's some really great kind of insights that you can gain on how you're working as a team and how productive you're being using some of these reports. There's a lot of issue analysis and stuff like that that we don't even touch. Okay, it's 3:54, so I'm pretty much out of time, but any particular questions? Now I see there's a couple in the issue queue. I don't know if I got to them.
It's not really a question, Eric. It's
okay.
I have
Any
a question.
questions? Yeah.
What was the name of the evaluation phase that you said that you often don't get around to? I think
Retrospective.
What gets in the way of doing the retrospectives?
Laziness, for sure.
Hmm.
Because it just actually takes a little bit of work to set that up. I would say laziness is a little facetious, but it's laziness partly on my part for not forcing the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I will also say that when I forced it on the team, there's actually there's a number of different retrospective tools out there. There's one I've used that I really like, and part of why I like it is it's free. I gotta track it down again. I can't remember the name of it, but you usually what I do is create 3 buckets. There's what's the stuff that went really well, and we should be doing more of that. And then there's what's the stuff that really was problematic, and we know had some major issues. And then there's this interesting bucket in the middle that's the what if bucket. So it's not that it went well or that it went badly. It's like, I just had these bigger questions. Well, what if we were like, this went perfectly fine, but what if we were to do something different? What if it didn't, we didn't have to care about that sort of thing? You ask some of these bigger questions that the whole column is designed to get you out of your box, so to speak. And the problem I often find is I will facilitate with the team, and it's a little bit hard for the team to come out of their shell and really get brutally honest about how things are going, and to also stretch themselves beyond just the tactical, what do I have to do today, to think about how could we really make some stepwise improvements in the way we work.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
mean, by the description, you would think it's a no-brainer. I mean, of course you would do that. If it could lead to some really great improvements in how we work, why would you not do that? But, we're kind of creatures of habit, and sometimes it's hard to get us to think about doing something really different.
And are you sure that it has the value that you would want from it? Like, in other words, you said it would take some extra effort to make it happen and commit the time. Like, do you feel that it would be worth it if you made that effort?
Sometimes yes.
If you can get
Sometimes
I guess
no.
it's if you can get the team to speak honestly and go into that space, right?
I mean, sometimes they're just really going to have a hard time making any suggestions or comments that really weren't fairly obvious. But you could make the argument that if only 1 out of 3 retrospectives yields a really one meaningful insight, I mean, it's probably still worth it, even if you only get 1 meaningful insight out of every 3 retrospectives. If that 1 meaningful insight leads to a meaningful change every couple of months in the way you work, that actually sounds pretty useful.
Yeah.
So Seema, we're going to do a retrospective next week.
Yes, Eric, we will do. There's a question from Ian.
Yeah, what was your middle bucket? There was the good stuff, the bad stuff.
And then the what if.
Oh, okay, thank you.
What if we did something just completely different? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So nobody wants to go. I'll throw another question at you. Can you talk a little bit about building backlog? We're very new and we're using Jira just for tasks. So we have to step up to epics and stories, and we're finding it hard to understand how Jira lines up with backlog. So
yeah. So again, there's some really great material out here, but the whole idea is that whoever's really the front end thinking about the problems that you're trying to solve for your customer, and the tangible, valuable features in your application that are going to be solving those problems.
Yeah, that's me.
And the experience that you want the user to have. Chad is lurking somewhere, currently has his dog, holding fort for him. But Chad would tell you, ask questions of your users and think about the experience that they have and how easy is it to find the things that you want them to find and use. All of that leads to a descriptions of the way that your user is experiencing your product. And ideally, you should be writing stories to explain that user experience. And you have to keep writing and rewriting those stories. And if you have a team, or even a team of 1 yourself, doing the development work, ideally you need to stay a little bit ahead of current development, writing stories about the work that you want to be doing, 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, 2 months from now, sort of thing. And obviously it's going to change, but you're trying to envision and really, sometimes it's like the Post-it note sort of thing. Just start throwing up all sorts of ideas. What's all the possible features and functionality that you want this amazing application to include, and that you want your user to experience as a means of solving these particular pain points that you're trying to solve? And just throw everything out there. And once you're kind of have it all out there, then you start to organize all those ideas into kind of short, medium, and long term. And then from there, what stuff goes together logically, and can I do it, in a 2-week period of time, or do I need 4 weeks? And
Okay.
there's a combination of both product management and project management, right? Product management is envisioning all of this stuff. And this is one of the other things that I'm going through is kind of my journey. I've spent most of the last year as a project manager, and I shouldn't be doing that, which is why Seema's come on board to be the project manager and the product owner, who is responsible for taking all of the stuff in the product backlog, getting it into the sprints, and then making sure that it gets done. I should be spending like 80% of my time talking with customers, talking with partners, talking with potential investors, getting all this outside in feedback about what of this app is really awesome and needs to be enhanced, what really sucks and we should not do it, and all of that kind of outside in feedback. That's where I should be focused as the product manager, and I should be filling that product backlog.
Okay.
It sounds like is what you should be doing as well.
Yeah. Well, we're a very small team, so everybody's doing everything, and we got to
Well,
try.
how small is small?
3. 1 project manager, 1 developer, and me doing all the rest.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, my first iteration on this, it was a team of 2, me and my brother, and we were doing it all.
Go.
And then I realized that we actually didn't know what the hell we were doing, and we couldn't code what needed to be coded. And so.
Well, that's a good question. Where did you find your team? How did you find your team?
Yeah. So listen, you all are welcome to stay, but if you're not going to ask questions, then Ian's going to keep, get to keep holding down the floor, and I'm just going to keep answering his questions because I like it when somebody asks questions. So there's an interesting, actually, I just stopped sharing, but I should do a share again. I think I'm sharing the right screen here. So on my really, really horrible, ugly home website, I've got a blog, and I put a post up here to how to find a technical founder / CTO, but it was also really kind of about finding a team. And this woman, Nellie, I mean, she's been a CTO, and she's coached and advised a lot of startups and stuff like that. She's now built this like 10-week master class that she sells for, I forget, like $2,000 or something like that. So she kind of baited me into, one of her little webinars, which sounded like it was how to find a founder, but it was actually, why don't you buy my course, and then I'll teach you how to find a CTO founder. And she went through kind of the 10 modules or the 10 steps that get you to hiring your team and designing your MVP and all of this. And what I actually found quite gratifying is when I went through this with her, I concluded more or less accurately, I think, that I was on step 9 of 10 in her steps. Doesn't mean I've done them well, but a lot of it was, you got to work on the idea. she put a lot of emphasis, and I don't think it comes out here, but like communities. You know, there's a reason I'm here presenting today, because we're putting ourselves out there and trying to connect and find communities. And through interactions like this, we connect with people who are really interested. And then from there, you find people who want to work together. And I, through personal relationship, found somebody that was actually starting a company called Comportment and was doing some web development work. And I really, really admire this guy, Anoop, and kind of the way we've worked together. And so in the end, I said, why don't we work together on this? And even though your team doesn't know how to spell Drupal, let alone do Drupal development.
Hey, Eric, I'm sorry, but the next.
Yes, we should wrap up. I was just waiting to get the hook.
Okay.
Eric, I'll contact you offline if you don't mind.
I actually would mind if you didn't contact me offline.
Cool, great.
Right.
Thank
So
you,
I need to
Eric.
give it up to Amy June, I think, who's
Yes.
going to be presenting next, right?
Yes.
Great. Amy, thank you for being patient with me.
You all.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
thank you, Ian, especially. Thank you for being very interactive. That was awesome. I'll look forward to talking with you.
Great.
And enjoy the rest of the day and the summit, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
All right.